Thanks.
Welcome back, everybody, to the A Little Less Fear podcast. I am Dr. Lino Martinez, your show host for today, and I would love to welcome Amythyst Herrick. She's a transgender author, podcaster, and activist. Her work focuses on the origin and nature of identity, especially gender. Amy's thought is best described as human activism, making identity safe across the globe. Welcome to A Little Less Fear podcast. So awesome to meet you.
Thank you so much for this invitation. I'm super pumped up.
I'm pumped up too. And after this, all this caffeine that I had, I feel like Woody Woodpecker here. Like I want to start tap dancing on my desk. But hey,
I know.
Amethysta, I love your name. Can we start out? Can I ask you where did this name come from? How did you come up with it?
Sure.
Besides
Originally,
purple being and amethyst being incredible, powerful stone.
right. Well, so I love gems, first of all. So I love gems and I love the color purple. And if, at some point I know people will be able to see,
And so you love my tie,
my face
correct?
in this.
You love my
Yes, I
purple
love
tie?
your tie.
Okay, great.
And, presumably like my own presentation's kind of, gonna ring a couple of us because of the purple hair and all that. But so when I made the name up. There's probably another Amethysta somewhere out in the world. I don't know. But I made the name up, and I made the name up for a video game character.
Oh, whoa.
I wanted a little purple cat girl character, and because I love amethysts, because see gems, you know how like I don't know if you ever played role-playing games, tabletop role-playing games or video games that are role-playing games. You get like gold, and gold is only okay, right? So like, you could melt the gold down and make a chalice and then melt the chalice back down and have the gold coins again. But a gem is durable. You can't get rid of that. If you cut it up, now you have smaller gems and they're actually worth less. So I like that about gems. And I like the color purple. And so I use that to make a name for this little purple cat girl on an online video game. So I already feel sort of dopey telling this story.
It's okay.
But I never intended to use this name. You had told me earlier on, or when, 10 minutes ago, that you had had a spiritual experience.
Yes.
And about, gosh, I don't know, 5 or no, farther back. So maybe 8 to 10 years ago, I started thinking about my own spirituality. And I ended up landing in a pagan tradition, druidry, actually. So part of that is engaging with your own deities. And there were 2 deities that stood out in particular. One is Brigid, who is a goddess of the hearth and home, also of the forge, somewhat interestingly. She's an Irish goddess. The other one is named Ceridwen, and she is she's thought of as a witch goddess at times, but she's a goddess of magic, a dark goddess.
Incredible.
So I'm telling you this story because at the beginning of 2022, and I started transition on July 7th, 2022. I suppose I could have mentioned that. You said transgender, never mind, everybody knows. Not a secret. So at the beginning of 2022, before I had really committed to transitioning, I had this big spiritual, basically, Ceridwen told me to do this one task. And I'm not going to tell you the whole task. It was basically, she said, put me into a statue. And I said, okay, put you into a statue. Sure, whatever. And it took about 2 months for this to become even vaguely clear to me. But when it did become clear, I ended up doing this one, I'll call it a ritual. I don't know that I want to use that word, but I did this one ceremony at the very end of it. And it was interesting because, first of all, it probably ended directly about the time that the moon would have been at its darkest.
Interesting.
And because Ceridwen is a dark goddess, that, it was kind of a powerful thing. But I went and I had this conversation with my goddess afterward with Ceridwen, and Ceridwen said to me, there you go. Now you're ready to be Amethysta. And I said, first of all, I haven't decided to transition. And second of all, I wouldn't use that name. you know? And she turns back around to me and she goes, "Oh no, you are Amethysta." And I
Wow.
went, "Mm-mm, no, that's a video game character and it's like a stripper name. Like I'm not calling myself Amethysta." And she
Oh
looks
my
me
goodness.
straight in the eye and she
Yeah.
goes, "No, you are Amethysta." And I held her eye and I went, "Okay."
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking, like, what difference does it make?
Sure.
Right? Because I can say yes to her, but I'm going to go down to the courthouse. Is she going to be there and like check the paperwork?
Right. Yeah.
Hey, I told you. Damn it. No, of course not. So, but then I started interacting with the transgender community on a writing site, a writing like a blog site,
Mhm.
Medium, I'll just say the name. And sort of as default, I just put in the name Amethysta and it started to work. People replied to me as Amethysta, and then I started writing myself as Amethysta. And by the time November 7th rolled around, when I was going to change my name here in Colorado, because it's easy, it took like 27 hours total. Um, I wrote down Amethysta because it started working. It started,
To
I
open
want
up
to
the
use
path towards your future.
yeah, I want to say like I became Amethysta, but I don't want to say that because what I realized was that I was, and that Carrid one was right. I mean,
That
it
makes
was not
sense.
a
You already
yeah,
were.
yes. So it was not a becoming. I'd like to think it was, but it's
Uh-huh.
not a becoming, and she was right. It was just that I am Amethysta, and that's where it came from. In no way did I intend to use that name. I thought it was a cute little name. That it is applied to me now is really sort
It's really
really
interesting how that
accidental.
unraveled, and I think it suits you
Yeah,
perfect.
thank you.
Amethysta.
It
So tell us
it
tell us
worked.
about your journey, Amethyst. So this is really incredible. You're a writer, a podcaster, a human activist, an author, a geneticist, a chemist, a software engineer. Holy moly. I mean,
I
out
know.
of all these titles and all these labels, which one feels most authentic to you? Or do they all make up your
Ooh,
juicy pot of authenticity?
ooh, that's a good question. I'm gonna talk for a while, and then hopefully I'll come to an answer.
Sure, let's
Because
keep going.
what happened, so when I was very young, and I'm sure you can actually identify with this, when I was very young, maybe 3 or 4 years old, I just believed I was a girl. It was easy for this to occur because I grew up with three sisters, first of all.
Hmm.
My father was fairly absent in our lives. And so I would say that I came close to as close as I could have to being socialized a girl in the first place. So I believed I was a girl. Sooner or later, by, 8 years old, maybe, I was realizing the world was treating me differently than it did my sisters. And
Amethysta, before we continue, for people tuning in for the first time or seeing this on YouTube, I mean, I could see that some people could possibly be confused because if I weren't to know who you are, whatever you look like, you were born a female, you look like female, you
thank
sound like a
you.
female. So
Oh,
before
thank
we
you.
continue with your childhood and everything, could you tell our listeners and our watchers what a trans woman is, or who is a trans woman? Could we describe transgender?
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. So you're going to get me into a big long topic here, but
Uh-oh.
because the only thing that I will say is that when I was born,
Yes.
some doctor looked at my body and based on external appearance assigned me a sex.
Mhm.
And a sex is different from a gender. We can certainly discuss that, but um, because of that M that a doctor, some MD stuck on my birth certificate, everybody assumed I should identify as a boy. And I never so again, to distinguish the two, there's a difference between having physical primary sex characteristics, that is a sex, but then the way that we present ourselves, the way we identify ourselves, that at least in part makes up a gender. There's a whole lot to that, and we can talk about it. But so being transgender, and by the way, I want to go on record to say that I hate that word because it implies there is a connection between sex and gender. And we only imply that
So
in
true.
humans. Yeah. See, I don't like the word cisgender either. This comes from chemistry, by the way. This comes
Oh,
from
I love it. Bring it on.
comes
Educate. I
from
love this.
organic chemistry. Yeah.
Yeah.
So in organic chemistry, if you have a double bond, so two carbons, I don't know how to do this. That's good enough. If you have two carbons double bonded to each other, they have four other bonds that can come off of them. And so if you have the two functional groups on the same side, that is a cis relationship between these two functional groups. If it is on the other side, the opposite side, that is a trans relationship between the two functional groups. And these come from the Latin, cis meaning, I believe cis means on the same as, and I think trans means of the on the opposite of. I believe my Latin may be a little rusty,
That's
believe it or
fine.
not, folks. So, but that is an obvious relationship. These are two functional groups connected to two connected carbons. That's a clear relationship. Sex and gender in the rest of the animal kingdom, in fact, for that matter, the plant kingdom, we don't assume that sex and gender are related. And there are actually many examples, particularly in the Great Barrier Reef. There are several species of fish that are born with the capability of expressing either sex. So the ability to create either a sperm or ova. And what they end up using as gender depends on social structure. And
This
so,
is fascinating.
yeah, so across the rest of the animal kingdom, biologists do not distinguish or do not equate sex and gender. With humans, we do. Why, I don't know. I think that I think that there are political reasons for doing that, but
Yeah.
your question started off with what is a transgender woman, and
Yeah.
I don't like the word. I will
Right.
certainly say a woman is somebody who appears to be a woman in society. Um, there are a lot of aspects to identity. I just said appears. Appears how? That could be physically, that could be, I believe that identity is a big complex of
Mm-hmm.
physical, cognitive, behavioral, and spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if you have somebody who does not, this is my opinion, and there may be listeners who disagree, but if you have somebody who does not physically appear to be a woman, let's say, or a man,
Mm-hmm.
but cognitively feels, he is a man or she
Right.
is a woman, and behaviorally close enough, and it has the behavior that are at least socially associated with um that gender, man or a woman. To me, that is a man or that is a woman,
Right.
because that's kind of the that's the definition. Presumably you're familiar with Judith Butler's concept of gender as a social construct. I don't completely agree with all of their theory, but wow, I could go on forever and ever. So a
Let's keep
transgender
going.
woman is me. A transgender woman is somebody who is assigned male at birth by some doctor who didn't know and didn't ask me who I was. And that's why now I have to go through some machinations to to assert my identity.
And in asserting your identity and not agreeing and actually hating the word transgender. And I feel in alignment with you as well, because to me I feel that it's just multifaceted, a person's identity. It's not boxed into one thing.
Right.
And so uh, in this feeling or knowing that transgender is not the proper word to identify you, what is the best word if you were to choose one to identify Amethysta?
There is only one word. I mean, I started by saying that cisgender and transgender imply a relationship. between sex and gender.
Mm-hmm.
And the word is only gender. We don't need cis or trans because each of us expresses gender. It's not related to sex. It was never intended to be related to sex. Conceptually, to a biologist, the two are different. The two are distinct concepts. So the word's only gender. I call myself a transgender woman, and I mean, I will identify as such because it holds the meaning that it holds the meaning that I had to transition, that there was a journey involved.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that. I like I like to identify, how do I want to put this? The transgender community is very much under attack. Presumably you're aware of this.
Right.
Um, I want to represent, I guess is the word I want to use. It's easy, well, it's not easy, but I know people who could go, go stealth, live as stealth, which is to say that if they moved somewhere, nobody would know this person was ever assigned a sex different from maybe what they present, to when they were met. Hopefully that sentence came out fine, but that's what living in stealth is. And maybe I could go somewhere and do that. I would not choose to do that because I want people to recognize the distinction between sex and gender. And so I identify, if I were to identify myself, I identify as transgender because I love the idea that maybe somebody could meet me and go, well, you seem, for lack of a better word, kind of normal.
Yeah.
Why, all the people I knew who were transgender, they were weirdos and they were people living on the corner, and you seem to have like a family and a relationship and had a successful career, and you seem able to speak, and that's because I'm totally normal. There was never anything wrong with me. There was never anything abnormal. Expressing gender is a universal human process. Each of
It
us has
is.
to go through this.
Yes.
Some of us think about it more deeply than others, but each of us does it. Each of us has to think about the person we are and how we would choose to express this within our social environment. Um, this leads into my own theory of gender. If you want me to switch topics a little bit.
Keep going wherever you feel comfortable. This is really incredible.
All right. Um, there is a type of Indian philosophy. It's one of the
Uh-huh.
darshanas. It's named Advaita Vedanta is the name of the philosophy. And you can sum up Advaita Vedanta in 3 words. Who am I? You go, oh, well, that's a pretty obvious question, right? Who am I? I'm sitting right here. Then you go, well, I don't know, because I can observe my body. I can look at my hands. I can even look at the picture on the screen here. If I'm observing it, am I the body? I shouldn't be because I can observe it. And that's one of the definitions of identity is that it is self-contained. It wouldn't be able to
Yeah.
observe itself, obviously. So I can't be my body. Well, maybe I'm my thoughts. No, because I can observe myself and say, I am thinking about something, I'm thinking about a particular topic, or I am feeling about a particular topic. And if I can observe these, I must not be them. There must be something outside. Now, this is my own opinion anyway. So there is something external to our physicality, our cognitive abilities, how we present within a social environment, the social environment itself. It's something outside of all of that. I choose to call it a soul, and at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter. In my own theory of gender, you have an origin of identity.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it's genetics. Some people would say it's genetics. Some people would say it's a soul. Some people would say it's biology, biochemistry. Some would say it's neurochemistry. Some would say it's brain structure. Really doesn't make a difference. Because the point is that origin of identity tells us who we are. If we Like if I were to ask you a goofy question, like what's your favorite color?
I like all colors, honestly. I don't have a favorite
Oh, come
color.
on. Well, help me out
No,
a little bit. Just
really. I did. I've been asked this so many times. I'm telling you, I love all colors. I know. Yeah.
how about a vegetable? Do you like broccoli?
I do like broccoli. Yeah.
Why?
I like broccoli, especially little baby broccolis because it feels nutritious. It makes me feel like I'm like strong, and it has a really beautiful, delicious, buttery, when I add a lot of butter, earthy flavor to it. And I feel like the green giant when I'm not. That's why.
Can I disagree with that? Like, can I say, no, I don't think that's true. You don't really like broccoli. I
Right.
mean, you do. And if I were to say, why do you like it? Like you told me taste and various other things, but why that taste? And you could go deeper and deeper, and sooner or
Yeah.
later, you'll get to a point where you go, because I know it. And there's no, it's unassailable. You say, because I know it. And that's what that origin of identity is. It's your it's your source of knowing what you like, what you like to do, whether you'd want to dance, like, do salsa dancing, whether you would, I don't know, I'm trying to come up with funnier things and it's
This is
not
great.
working.
Yeah.
But
It
it's
is
the
working.
origin of identity that knows that. Then the other half of the equation is your social environment. In the social environment, we have a sense of safety or not. We fear repercussions or not. Maybe we're supported, but there is a negotiation. And the negotiation is, I have my origin of identity, so I know who I am. I know what I like, I know what I want, I know what feels right to me. And then you have the social environment that may or may not accept this. And so identity
They
is,
may or may not accept that I like broccoli.
I accept it just fine. We had a president not that long ago, the first Bush, who said he hated broccoli. I couldn't believe it. I'm like, God damn, really? Broccoli is
Oh,
great. What's
yeah.
what's wrong with you, man? And we won't go into any of those questions. The but I mean, like I was saying, I can't disagree with that, with your love of broccoli. The social environment, at this point, probably isn't gonna, come after you with pitchforks and torches.
Right.
I don't think, for liking broccoli, but there are things that they will. Like when I was growing up, I expected to be treated as a girl, and there were social situations where I was treated as a boy, and it confused me. And I mean, I look back on much of my life and go, why would somebody not believe that I didn't want to be treated that way? Because my origin of identity told me how I wanted to be treated. It told me what I felt and what I believed, and my deepest seated motivations and desires. My social environment rebelled against that. So, in my theory, gender is a process of negotiation between
Mm-hmm.
who you know you are and the level of safety you feel expressing that within your social environment. And the result, the implementation,
Right.
which is the result of the negotiation, is what I call gender identity. It's been described as gender expression as well,
Mm-hmm.
but it is that complex that I mentioned of the way you present yourself, the thoughts that you have, the way you behave, and then finally this complex or this characteristic of spirituality, how you connect to the universe, because we do it having transitioned and having been a very spiritual, having had a very deep spiritual practice, both presenting as a man and now presenting as a woman. It changed. So that's another dimension of our identity. It's that spiritual. So
How did it change, Amethysta?
when I was when I was presenting as a man, I wanted to direct things, and now I want to receive things. This is in Western magical tradition, which I mean, I don't have to give a dissertation here on Western magical tradition. but some of our ideas of gender come out of the concept of the idea that actions can be gendered, and
Uh-huh.
a masculine action is something activating, it's something directing, it's something
Right.
initiating,
Right.
and feminine actions are receiving and nurturing and completing.
Uh-huh.
And you know, if you look at some spiritual practices, Wicca in particular, at least Gardnerian Wicca, both the god and the goddess are necessary to do anything, because you need to start something in motion and you need to complete it. And one without the other goes nowhere. I I think we can look at,
One
I
without
don't
the
want to
other
go,
goes nowhere, therefore we need both.
yes. And you can look at how we are running in circles now in this patriarchal society. And I want to go super nuts on a rant here, but we run in a lot of circles because we choose to divorce we choose to divorce and diminish the receiving and the nurturing and the completing, because we think that if we just keep running in the direction, we're going to hit some destination.
Right.
But the destination is the completion. So if you run in a direction, but you don't intend actually to finish it, you're not going to hit that destination, because you're not there. It's not there. So in any
So in
event,
this okay, so going back to the origin of identity and how it's gender is a process of negotiation with the social environment, correct? That
yes,
is okay.
yes,
And in so gender is a social construct, correct?
a gender role. So before I go too far, social construct, I think, is thrown around, and I don't know how many people understand where that concept comes from, because it's not Judith Butler's. It's oh, for the life of me, the philosopher just went out of my head. It was a French philosopher, 16th century, 17th century, I guess 17th century. And the concept, the idea is that when you have a social construct is something, let me try this again. If you have a word and the word only gains meaning by its use, that is a social construct.
Okay.
The way Butler uses gender, considers gender a social construct, is to say that a man is what is contextual to that social environment.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
In say Western society, a man is modern Western society, a man is somebody who is wearing a lovely purple, maybe not always a purple tie, but wearing a tie, doing a bunch of pointing and just
Hmm.
stuff like
Being
that.
directive, as you mentioned earlier.
Yes, right. But if you look at something like, say, pre-revolution France, it was actually very different. Um, I mean, even if we just look at appearances, like I've got not super long flowing hair, but I've got, longer hair. I'm wearing makeup right now. I'm actually not wearing high heels. And you couldn't tell because my feet are not showing, thankfully. But those were the peak of masculinity in pre-revolution France. But I'm doing them now as actually expressions of femininity. And so the
True.
way Butler used social construct with regard to gender was to say that those roles are particular to the social construct context of the social environment. They gain meaning by being used by that social environment. So that's the meaning of social construct. Did I say that
Yeah,
well
makes
enough to?
makes
Okay.
perfect sense to me.
So when your question was, is gender a social construct? In my terminology, I suppose I would say gender as the process is not. Gender is a universal process that each of us has to go through. What I described was not my transgender process. It was the process of gender for every person on the planet. What Butler mostly described was a gender role, to say that,
That makes sense. So gender role versus a gender process.
yes, Yes. And a role, I think, is an abstraction of all the things I mentioned. It's there are physical aspects, makeup, there are behavioral aspects, being nurturing and completing, cognitive, many women are, choose to be softer than what would be stereotypically
Mhm.
masculine. So all of those, so a gender role is an abstraction of all of those as the complex, I guess
Mhm.
is how I would put that. So did I answer that question well enough? Did
I
that
feel you did. Yeah,
okay,
definitely makes sense. I'd like to go back to thank you for answering that. Appreciate it.
sure.
Yeah, this
I
is
love
incredible. I
this.
love this stuff.
This is what I
So
do.
going back going back to I had asked you a question earlier of what the difference was as far as how what your role was more directed towards as a man compared to a woman. And your response was before you were more direct and now you're more on the receiving end. Are
Yes.
these two things, I mean, I see it more as energy. So
Yes.
there, it's more of like an energetic process. So in this energetic process where you went from being more direct to more of a receiving type energy, would you be able to say, is it true for you that both of these energies have existed within you innately? And now that you express yourself more in this receiving energy, that you're able to go down that path a little more openly?
Yes. Um, wow. I appreciate that you understood that. Um,
Great. You're welcome. I
well,
appreciate you answering this stuff.
no, because it was a huge thing. There was, I've mentioned conversations that I've had with this goddess, and at the very, very beginning of 2022, I'm thinking to myself, would I want to transition? Because it's kind of hard being transgender these days. Would I want to do it? Because I had no idea. I mean, you complimented me, said I look like a woman, I sound like a woman, and thank you.
You're welcome.
But I had no idea what was going to happen
Right.
if I were to start hormone therapy.
Hmm.
Would I actually end up in a place where, I might someday pass as a cisgender woman? And so I had a lot of concern about this. One of the things that Caridwen told me is that transgender people in particular are very powerful to the universe because we are capable of understanding and possibly mobilizing energy in both aspects, both directing and receiving.
Yeah.
And over the course of my life, I mean, I've seen that. There were times
Yeah.
when I could direct uh some event, and then I could complete other events. And I mean energetically. I'm trying to hold back from using the word magic, but
Sure. It's all
but now
energy.
I just used it. So there you go. Yeah. Um, so, Caridwen at the very beginning telling me that meant that our role in the universe is very, I mean, first of all, it's going to be challenging, but it can also be very powerful. Um, if I were going to go off on a slight tangent, which I'm gonna because I'm not going to let you stop me,
All right. Yeah, let's go off on a
in
tangent. Go for it.
in in evolutionary psychology, uh, I don't know how much of evolutionary psychology you've read. The intent is to say the evolution, not necessarily of physical aspects of a species, but rather its social aspects, in particularly, cognitive and behavioral. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because for any species, if I were just talking about evolution as a whole, for any species to persist, it needs to be able to adapt to its environment.
Hmm.
That was Darwin's original,
For survival.
yes, survival of the fittest. If you are unable to adapt to an environment, you will harm, ultimately the species harms itself and will go extinct. Evolutionary psychology tracks that in terms of social, what's the word I want to use? Social traits. I'll use that.
Okay.
And I believe, well, because I mean that's the physical That's the physical word. To say that a bird has a beak, that's a trait. It's a a
Right.
physical trait. So these are social traits that evolutionary psychology would track. And I believe I've written about this, that a society capable of embracing all roles has an evolutionary advantage. Because I mean, I remember this from when I was a kid, people saying, how come we still have gay people? Because shouldn't they have been bred, they can't have kids. Shouldn't they have been bred out of existence? And it was like an honest question,
Sure.
saying, well, if genetics is the thing that directs all of our identity, why do we still have gay people? And it makes much more sense in a social dimension, I guess, because any society capable of embracing it is going to benefit from whatever it brings. Because
Exactly.
homosexual relationships can help care for a society, but doesn't add further burden in terms of children. I mean, thinking of this,
Sure.
early agrarian societies, no new mouths to feed, but the ability of supporting the society. So like there's a great evolutionary advantage to that. The ability to switch gender, I don't want to say switch gender, but express both genders,
Express. Yeah.
to utilize energy in two directions, like that's huge. Any society willing to embrace that gains a major evolutionary advantage. And if you look at our earlier civilizations, they did. They embraced both homosexuality and gender fluidity. And you'll notice we're still sitting here talking, so there must have been
Right.
some benefit to that. So that was my tangent there.
That's an Yeah, that's great. Thanks for going on that tangent. And as you were saying that, I was just thinking about other like prehistoric cultures and how they really did embrace like men dressing like women or women
Mhm.
dressing like men, and it was
Oh,
just
sure.
it was welcomed and it was beautiful, and intersex people were magical, and they were
Yes.
seen as sacred. And
Yes.
so
Yes.
I'm just wondering, like, where did it all fall through the cracks, and how did intersex or people expressing both genders all of a sudden not become sacred? Why were they all of a sudden seen as, I guess, just not human?
I have a theory, and it's
Sure,
it's
what's your
not
theory?
it's not a really it's not a really it's somewhat of an ugly theory, but I'm gonna go. I'll tell it. When And I'm not going to lay all the blame on Christianity. What I'm going to say is that in earlier cultures, we were okay with the idea of intersex people. We were fine with the idea of gender fluidity because those cultures understood that food comes from the earth. And the earth is a very feminine aspect in all
Yes,
pre-cultures.
Mother Nature.
Yes, right. Mother Nature, right? We have Mother Nature. The moon has always been seen as feminine. There are two cultures actually where the moon is seen as masculine and the sun is feminine, but in most cultures those are reversed. But we look at aspects of nature in a gendered way, and we knew that if you didn't have the sun, what the seeds that you planted in the earth were not going to grow. You needed both masculine and feminine. In in the early days of Christianity, uh, in my opinion, I mean, if you look at some of the lesser translated gospels, because some of them have been sort of not even sort of, some of them were rewritten during the
Yeah.
fourth century. Uh, but if you look at some of these others too that have been found, like some of the Dead Sea Scroll gospels, I guess that's the word I want to use. The point is that they are much more in line with the idea of you still need nature, you still need that. But as these started to get rewritten, and as Christianity wanted to convert many pagans to Christianity, which has a long historical context to it that I won't bother even trying to explain here. But as Christianity wanted to go through this big conversion process, the first thing they needed to do was show that the earth was evil, because paganism is an earth religion. It's a worship of nature. And so if you can say, look, the earth is bad, people will go, oh, well, then I shouldn't worship that. What do you got? You got Christianity? Fine. Sure, I'll convert. Why not? And some Christian conversion therapies also were, oh, you won't convert? Well, here, I have a point of a sword. What do you
Yeah,
think? Okay,
right.
now I'll
We'll make
convert.
you. Yeah.
Right. So I'm going toward a point here. When you got to the medieval era, because I mentioned Western magical tradition, and that's really the seed of Western magical tradition, the medieval era. But if you look at books that were written during this time to describe magic, they're all written in Christian symbology. And they do that because if you didn't, there was the very good chance you were going to get burned at the stake. And many people wanted to avoid that, like you do,
Sure.
because I don't want to get burned at a stake.
Right.
And I believe what that did was transfer forward into science. And when the Renaissance, when the Renaissance occurred, like there was some light switch somebody flipped on. Okay, we're going to be enlightened here now, folks. Jim, go be enlightened. And you're okay. I'm going to be
Yeah.
enlightened. So, but when the Renaissance occurred, I think there was still that influence. There was still a Christian influence that wanted to divorce humanity from the rest of nature. And so we still do this. I mentioned at the very beginning, we only see sex and gender as possibly equated in humans. I never mentioned my first the first bit of education I got was in biology, and then finished the PhD in chemistry instead of biology. But I wanted to do genetics because I wanted to know why I was who I was. And it was assumed at the time, I mean, this was the 1970s, 1980s, it was assumed at the time that genetics held the answer to all of this.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't believe it of any other species, but we believe it of humanity. And this is a more of a hypothesis than anything, but I think that is a Christian influence that wants to divorce humanity from nature. And so I think that's the origin. You could take it further if you're going to be very cynical. Well, you don't have to be that cynical, but if you're going to be a little bit cynical, almost all politics comes from needing a sense of control. And so when you can invalidate people's identities, invalidate other people's identities because of something like genetics, you gain a massive amount of control. Why are women inferior? Well, they don't have a Y chromosome, right? Why are gay men, problematic? Why should we hold them down? Well, maybe there's something genetic. Why are transgender people invisible? Well, because, they're not respecting their genetics. There's no evidence, very, very little evidence to show that genetics does a ton for identity. But I mean, influence is much of identity, but that is a common fallacy.
It really is. Is it in your genes? And if it's not in your genes, then what?
See, we didn't care for, supposedly history starts about 30,000 years ago. Not necessarily written, but oral history certainly is expected to have gone back something like 30,000 years, when humans, Homo sapiens, were thought to start to begin agriculture to create agrarian societies. But it's only been 70 years that we've really known much about genetics. And we have this, humans want to, I always feel silly saying this because I'm a scientist, right? I mean, I went through 28 years worth of education total going to become a scientist, chemist and everything. And we want to believe that science holds the answer to everything. And if it doesn't, that's fine. We'll just force it. We'll just assume there's a scientific reason. And we don't want to believe that there's the possibility that something could be unknown.
Right.
But there's so much we don't know. Interestingly, what we don't know is unknown.
Exactly.
And I would love to see the world recognize that much of what we know about ourselves comes from an unknown location.
Most of what we know about ourselves comes from an unknown location. I love that.
Thank you. It just fell out of my head. I was hoping it would be a little more eloquent, but I'll take it.
It comes from unknown source.
Yeah.
However, that source is within us. So we do recognize it and we do know it. We're just not fully aware of
Yes.
this source.
Right. We know it. Why do we
We
know
know.
it? No, no.
We just know it.
So, yeah. So I
Can we
don't want
go?
to.
Thank you for that, Amethyst. I really appreciate it.
Sure.
Thank you. Can we go back to let's go back to the whole gender identity as far as people having to check mark a box, like
Yeah.
being other or being trans or even bi or whatever, and how you were, I mean, you made it really clear, and thank you for the explanation of gender and sex and how they don't equate, but humans have to make it equate for their own way of creating structure, or their own way of
Right.
whatever is the biggest part of their mental capacity to understand, or should I say emotional capacity, or maybe both.
Yes.
And so what about I mean, we can't speak for other transgender community, but what I have experienced is the adamancy, the how can I say this with using careful words, or just really protective over that word, and just really kind of just going far with it and using it as their pure way of identifying themselves and themselves only. I mean,
Yeah.
where because I feel that it becomes really painful when people box themselves in so hardly, so it becomes harsh and it
Yeah.
becomes resistant and it's inflexible and it creates a lot of pain, and instead of creating diversity, it creates walls. and
Yeah.
and then also I just feel that there needs to be some other box like human, and I just I just wonder, like, do you feel that this is ever going to happen? I mean, could we just have a box that says I'm human? I don't know why we have to keep putting boxes in other than statistics, and I don't know. What do you have to say to that?
Do I ever think it'll happen? At this rate, I don't. Just because we really want to find some scientific reason to explain who we are. What I'd love to see, I mean, there's, I've studied enough genetics at this point to make some statements around it. There are, at this point, I don't know the exact number. It was greater than 1,200 identified intersex characteristics. 1,200. I mean, think about that. There are a total of about, well, depending upon, what you want to include, somewhere between 20 and like 27,000 genes total in the human genome. Not a whole ton, 20 to 30,000. And we have 1,200 identified intersex characteristics. And I bring this up because most of those, I think, go undetected. I happen to respond to hormone therapy very quickly, very well. All of my dosages have historically been very low. I've never needed an anti-androgen. So it is suspected I might have intersex characteristics that have fostered my reaction to estrogen. And since there are 1,200, like there's actually a pretty good chance. If you were to look up the statistic, geneticists or biologists, I suppose, think that the chance of having an intersex characteristic is somewhere between, depending upon whom you ask, 1 to 5%. of the population would have one of these intersex characteristics. But we only know statistics, we can only measure something when we observe it. And who would have ever observed it in me? If I had not
Sure.
started HRT, nobody would have
Right.
known that I respond to estrogen extremely well.
Yeah.
So I guess where I would end this answer, the reason why I think at the rate we're going, we're not going to get there, is because there's so much that we don't even measure, and we make also a logical fallacy of assuming that all the data we have is complete. But there are also huge ethical concerns of analyzing every human's genome, because that would be the answer. Every person submits to genetic testing so we can see how many people are actually XY genotypes, but expressing primary sex characteristics of a female, and vice versa, because both have been documented.
Yeah.
What's the real rate? We don't even know. We certainly, transgender is considered an anomaly, but is it? I doubt it. I think everybody experiences gender dysphoria, and it's not the pure experience of a transgender person. That everybody experiences this. Is it a pathology? Absolutely not.
Can we go a little
So
deeper into this? Everybody experiences gender dysphoria.
yeah, I
For
so I have
people
a friend.
listening to for the first time, what is gender dysphoria?
I guess the way DSM-5 puts it, gender dysphoria is a sense of discomfort, or there's another word that's in there. You're gonna have to help me out.
I don't know it
I'm a
by memory.
chemist.
I don't.
It's discomfort or dissatisfaction. I don't remember exactly how it's put. It's extremely clinical. That basically that says that your how you are expressing your gender is in conflict with how you wish you could. And I'm you know paraphrasing tremendously,
Hmm.
but like, let's make this general. I mean, think about that, because actually I believe DSM brings sex into it, which is a bummer. I believe they use assigned sex at birth
Mhm.
as part of the verbiage. But if we were to, so I have a friend, I have a good example, in my opinion. I have a friend who uh, had breast cancer, and unfortunately, and had a
Mhm.
unilateral mastectomy. So it's one breast was removed, only one. And she was not a good candidate for breast augmentation, for plastic surgery,
Okay.
reconstructive surgery. And so as a result, she has to wear a prosthetic. And there are bras that you can put prosthetics in that keep them
Right.
more or less in place, but she is very conscious of it. And she is conscious of it because how many breasts do women have? They have two. That is a social construct right there.
Sure.
Women have two breasts. She does not conform with what she is expected to in society. She feels discomfort for it. What is that other than gender dysphoria? You could
Mhm.
say it was body dysmorphia, but is that body dysmorphia can become much more pathological than I mean, because it can manifest as anorexia, various. I don't want to talk about body dysmorphia.
Sure.
Let me back out of that.
Sure.
But
That's okay.
um,
This is a great
but could that
example,
be?
though, and it's a perfect example. Thank you for this.
There's also, like, I want, when I have spoken to men are great targets for this. I'll spare you, but I like talking to men who go, what's wrong with you? How could you not? How could you feel that you're not a man? And I've said, well, did you ever play sports when you were a kid? Which is a great disarming question, because men would, oh, yeah, I batted a billion or something in Little League. I don't actually know these numbers. I think it's only 1,000 you can do, but
I
anyway,
don't
I
know those
bad,
numbers.
right? You're gonna get calls. They're like, gosh, you guys are terrible. Learn how to
I don't
learn
know
some
these numbers.
sports. Anyway, you go, did you ever play sports? And you have people go, oh yeah, sure. I was the quarterback on the team or whatever. And you say, well, did you ever throw a pass and it didn't get caught? And the person goes, oh my gosh, yeah, all the time. Well, how did you feel about that? Oh, well, it felt like hell. Why? I mean, of course, you're supposed to be able to throw a ball and, the other person gets it and you get a touchdown, you win the game and well, why did that hurt? And it's like, well, because you're supposed to win the game. And it's like, that is a sense of dysphoria. You have failed to meet the social expectation of a man throwing a football. And usually you get some guy who goes,
Damn.
shit. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
It's like, now what?
Yeah.
But each of us experiences something that it's a sense of discomfort that we've failed to meet social expectations. And that technically is all gender dysphoria is. When I was a kid, I'm not going to use the phrase when I was a boy. When I was a kid, I didn't want to live up to social expectations of a boy. That hurt. When other people were boys, if they failed to do it, that hurt. Why were my feelings different from theirs? I can come up with no reason. This is why I believe gender, particularly as a process, is universal.
It
I mean,
is.
if we go to Ron DeSantis, which by the way, Ron, we all know you're wearing heel lifts. Okay.
Oh my
I mean, I'm
gosh.
just saying.
Oh my goodness.
Why is he doing it?
Hmm.
Because politicians should be tall. Men should be tall to be powerful. If you don't meet up, if you don't meet this tall, powerful man social expectation, could you be a politician? Could you be a good politician? Would people trust you? There are so many social aspects to inform Ron DeSantis is, and I'm extrapolating. Maybe he's not. All right, I don't care.
It's fine. I get
But
it.
but if he is, why? Is that not gender dysphoria? Why would he contend then that my gender dysphoria is different from his? Because I don't want to be big and powerful and a politician, thankfully. Um, I mean, I'm sure there are other people listening going, yeah, thankfully, you're a nutbag.
No.
But there's a reason why social expectations exist. Gender dysphoria is a great reinforcer of social roles. It's the way that we learn our social roles. I don't mean to say that it's fun, obviously, but gender dysphoria is a necessary part of our experience because it's how we learn to be, in part, who we are. Because we have to
Amethysta,
try these things on.
I would love to hear you do a TED talk on this. You really, I mean, apply for it, whatever you need to do for reals,
Thank you.
because I mean, it's just what I love is that you're calling yourself a human activist, which is incredible because that's really what this is about. You're sticking up for humanity and all these things that a lot of people are surrendering to themselves to,
Yes.
and in so it's causing a lot of suffering rather than
Yes.
acceptance.
Right.
And so, I mean,
And
and
not
that's
just me, not just you, everybody
everybody, right?
faces this suffering, and we don't have to. I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
Not at all. This
I'm
is
very
incredible.
passionate about this.
I see it and I love it. So, and in doing so, you become a human activist with speaking about
Mhm.
gender and identity roles and it being a process of negotiation with social environment. I mean, all of this is what your idea of making identity safe across the globe, and I think this is an incredible idea. And I really, I applaud you for this and for speaking up because a lot of people are not speaking up about this, let alone the LGBTQIA plus community. So, thank you so much
Yeah.
for your efforts, for your strength in this, for your passion, for your integrity, and for being authentic in your nature and coming forth to bring this into light for everybody to recognize, to appreciate, and to make radical change for acceptance, love, and to bring in the real deal diversity.
Well, let me thank you for the microphone then, because I'm
Absolutely.
not doing anything different than what any philosopher did across the millennia, across human history. I'm just talking about humans. So
Yeah.
What I need is a bigger microphone. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Oh, definitely. And so, yeah, I feel like we can continue talking about this. I really, thank you so much for inviting me on your podcast. I'm really looking forward to people that are listening in
Oh
for
my
the first
gosh.
time. Amythyst Herrick has her own podcast. What is the name of your podcast?
That one is Gender Identity Weekly because it's the podcast of the website that I use for my professional work, which is Gender Identity Today. Actually, genderidentitytoday.com. At least it's truth in advertising. But so
And so in Gender Identity Weekly podcast, what type of topics do you have? Is it all on gender identity, or are people talking about other stuff?
that's a great. So I love just to think about identity. How did people become the person they are? Why I had a podcast before. There was my very first podcast ever. It was called Why Are You? Because I wanted to ask people like pointed and very vague questions. Like if you were a tree, what tree would you be? If you were a fruit, what would you taste like? It was weird questions, but people
Those are
in
great
answering
questions. I
them,
love that.
thank you. People in answering them would say, "Oh, well," like there was one gosh, actually my first transgender mentor was the one who said this because I asked her. Her name is Bianca. I won't give her whole name, but I asked Bianca that question. If you were a fruit, what would you taste like? And she is from South Africa, now lives in Israel. As you can imagine, she's got a bit of a rough existence going on now. She's a transgender woman, transitioned running on 30 years ago, I believe. But I asked her and she said, "Oh, I think back to my childhood in South Africa." And her eyes got, very this far off look.
Mhm.
And she told me this story about she grew up and there was a farm and there were chickens running and various other things and there were trees. For the life of me, Bianca, I'm sorry, I forget what the name of the fruit was. But she came up with a fruit and said, I would want to taste like that fruit. But it was this
Wonderful.
it was an origin story that so you asked me what do I talk about on Gender Identity Weekly? I like to know why people are the way they are because by presenting stories, not just transgender stories, not just even LGBTQ stories, there's a lot of diversity in the human experience, but there's a lot of commonality. And I mean, even when Bianca was telling me about growing up in South Africa, like I can think back to my childhood in California, Southern California. We didn't have chickens, but I certainly grew up at a time when the holidays came around, it was like 60 degrees, right? I mean, you're
Yeah.
right there. So, it's like 60 degrees outside, and it was like, oh, it's Christmas, fine. I'm gonna go play with my toys outside in
Yeah.
shorts because this is what you can do.
Yeah. California, Southern California for sure.
But it was formational, right? I mean,
Mhm.
I look now because living in Colorado, we tend to have very cold holidays. I mean, I celebrate winter solstice, but um, we tend to have very cold holidays, and that actually changes my understanding of the winter solstice because I grew up at a time in a place where it was very warm, and now I think of winter solstice as a very cold time, which is good because it's the shortest day of the year and everything. So anyway, that's what I like to talk about.
Excellent.
Origin stories.
I
So
love this origin stories on Gender Identity Weekly,
weekly,
which is the
yeah.
name of your podcast. How can our viewers, our watchers, and our listeners find you if they need to get a hold of you? What are your social media um, handles?
The best way to do this, so I'm most active on Mastodon and Blue Sky. I do have an Instagram and a TikTok and a Facebook, but the best way to get to anything is to go to amethysta.io because that's got links to all of my social media presences. There's also a way that you could contact me because I do public speaking as well. You would have mentioned a TED Talk, and I thought, well, I've got something just about ready to go, but
Excellent.
um, I
You
not for
can.
a TED Talk. There's a few uh, topics that I've done public speaking on. So
Excellent.
But that's the way to get in touch.
Great, Amethysta. Well, I'm gonna end this with a poem that I wrote. I felt into the energy of your incredible topics here, and also combined it with my energy and my life experience. So I've got a short poem here that I wrote dedicated to this podcast episode. Thank you for the inspiration. It's called "I Am Whole." So here it goes. In the midst of unblanketing gender, in the midst of stripping off labels, who am I? Who am I if I don't wear a suit? Who am I if I don't wear a dress? For it's in these questions that I find myself in the warm arms of love. The only box I check is love. In the midst of remembering who I am, a warm embrace is welcomed. A smile from an angel is discovered, and doors open towards a new self identity. And in that, I am whole. And there it is. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you and motivating me. And I appreciate your
Thanks.
emotions. Definitely, it's love. It's definitely love. Thank you, Amethysta. Amethysta, you're gonna make me cry here. Come on. You're gonna make
I'm
me cry
sorry.
on the show. My goodness.
I know I don't. There's always a weepy moment on. Hang on, let me try to pull myself together. I always end up with a weepy moment on mine. I didn't think I was gonna end up with a weepy moment. Thank you. I gotta find my
Thank you.
my
This is
Kleenex.
beautiful. Well, I look
Oh my
forward to keeping in
gosh.
touch with you. Thank you for the motivation. Thank you for being courageous. Thank you for being you. And I look forward to
Thank
being
you.
on your podcast. Everybody, this is Amythyst Herrick. Thank you so much for being on a Little Less Fear podcast. And I look forward to staying connected with you.
Thank you.
Oh, well, you're welcome.